Hello and welcome to the Classical Next podcast, the global platform for the ideas and the people redefining classical and art music worldwide. I'm your host, David Taylor. Today, I'm talking with Aubrey Bergauer, arts leader, consultant, author of the book Changing the Narrative, and the former CEO of the California Symphony Orchestra. Aubrey is a powerhouse in the industry, and as the name of her book would suggest, a huge advocate of today's topic, change. In this conversation, we dive into the reasons as to why change is important. We look at some of the barriers that prevent change and how we can be more nimble. We also explore the power of embracing change and the benefits of having a more commercial and business-minded approach, before looking at some of the future challenges we might face as an industry. Aubrey is always a joy to speak to, and her energy is infectious, so I know that you will love this episode. Right, that's enough from me. Let's jump in. Aubrey, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Hey, David. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Well, in a very lucky situation because you've been an attendee at the Classical Next conference before, as well as presenting there. So you know everything about Classical Next. But not just that, also at conferences all across the world. And we, as an industry, as a sector, talk about change a lot of the time, whether that is business models, marketing, audiences, diversity, programming, all of these different things. What are some of the reasons that you see that we as an industry need to change?
Oh, we're coming out of the gate hard, I see on this. Okay, so reasons we need to change. For me, it starts with our budgets. I know it is difficult to manage an orchestra right now, any classical music organization for that matter, any arts organization for that matter. And so for me, needing to change really started from the very practical issue of we've got to fund the work we do. And that's my desire and my role in this field. And so many of us listening, that's our role. And so it starts there, I think, of just, how do we fund this art we love so much? Then to unpack that a little bit, it starts to get into, well, what is changing? Like, why are we not making the money we used to make? Why is it more difficult now than it used to be? And then that gets into, I think, really our change needs to be a response to the change we're seeing in the world around us. And there's a whole bunch we could say about that, but just to name a few things, changing consumer behavior is affecting all of us right now. Changing subscription models is affecting literally any subscription business on planet Earth right now, and inside, outside the arts. There's just a lot of change generationally in our workforce and what they expect. And so as institutions, how do we respond to that? I could go on and on and on. There's just so many things. But I think as I'm unpacking it out loud here, a lot of the change I advocate for, like I said, started as a practical matter. And then once you start to kind of peel the layers, it's like, okay, it's in response to other things that are changing. And that's the hand we're dealt.
Definitely. I think the idea of being reactive to all these challenges that we're facing, and some of these challenges are piling up at a faster rate. I think it's good to know that there's a reason for this and we're not changing for changing's sake for all
Yeah.
of this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. With that, I'm not sure if you've had a similar experience, but it feels that sector-wide, we're talking about change a lot more and the need for it, whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was more resistance to this as a topic in each of the different areas. But it's now growing more and we're hearing about it more and more. However, we rarely actually see meaningful change happen a lot of the time. I'm more than happy to share that at conferences, sometimes you go and you hear the same conversation you heard 12 months previously at different things. So obviously there's some barriers that we face to making change. What are some of the barriers that you experience, that you consult on, that you help people work through?
Yeah, I think this is the right question. I don't think there's a lack of desire. I think that's what you were describing. Like there is more talk of change, which makes me so happy as somebody whose entire brand is built on change. It's literally the name of my company, Changing the Narrative. And so, as you said, it's not change for change's sake. It's we're wanting to do things differently, better, to see previous question in response to what's going on around us. But how do we do that? Why is there so much resistance? So a couple things. I think one, inertia is a very powerful force. And, I've been in this business over 20 years now, and I too learned to do things a certain way. And so sometimes unlearning or relearning or continuing our skill building as professionals, um, that's tough. And again, I don't think it's because there's lack of desire. I used to think that. I used to think, just to share my own journey on this, I used to think like, wow, some people are incalcitrant, just like really digging their heels. And then I realized I don't think that's it, actually. I think the desire is there, and it's we're so busy, we're overworked and underpaid. We're trying to get a million other things done for the concert this weekend or fill in the blank thing. And it's just so hard to find the bandwidth to learn something new, change something operationally, try to do it a different way because you have to go slower before you can go faster, kind of a thing. And so all that kind of rolls up under this umbrella of inertia. Sometimes what feels easier is the default, even though it's costing us. Okay, so that's thing one. I think another reason we can be resistant to change is I just learned about this. Some of these things some things I'm going to say right now. Uh, I was just listening to an expert. I'm at a conference right now speaking, and I was just listening to this other session the other day. And this person is he's a scientist, psychologist, journalist, and he was talking about how the research on people changing their mind, at least changing their mind, is we are resistant when there is a threat to our belonging in a group, our status in a group, or our personal agency. And I whipped open the laptop, David, and I started taking notes. And so it's kind of very like, what am I trying to say? Timely that this conversation is happening like a day later because it's all fresh on my mind. And now I'm getting to like geek out and process it with you. But that right there was, yeah, it made so much sense to me. This guy kept saying, the psychologist, he was like, we're social primates. We're social primates. And I was like, right. So when there's a threat to our belonging, if I do something differently, if I speak up in my workplace, if I try to push for change, does that threaten my employment? Does that threaten how my boss looks at me? Does that threaten how, if you're the chief executive, how I'm going to interact with the board, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, these are powerful forces, powerful forces. Or does it affect status was another one. That kind of is the same thing. Am I going to lose my job over this? Am I going to, or whatever? And then the last one, we're resistant to change, at least changing our minds when it affects our agency or threatens our agency. And this one I have thought about before in the context of classical music, and I think I'll wrap this answer up with this, is to say, when we talk about, to get specific, when we talk about changing something like the words on our website, how can we write copy that's more approachable, less full of classical music jargon, and use more layman's terms or, whatever to meet our audience or potential audiences where they are. I realized a couple years back, it's not that somebody feels threatened in terms of I don't want to speak differently. It's more like, this is hard for people to articulate sometimes because it can be subconscious, but it's more like I feel threatened because I worked so hard to acquire the knowledge I have about our art form. So to speak differently, or, the term I hear all the time, right, is dumbing it down. I don't want to dumb it down. It's not dumbing it down if somebody never learned it in the first place. But okay, so you put all this together and it's like, right, there is a deep internal threat sometimes that we're not even always consciously aware of. So this is a long-winded way of saying like resistance to change. Yes, it can be practical, operational inertia, or it can be, I think, something really deep inside a person. And we don't always even know that that's like the tension we're holding in ourselves.
I absolutely love that because it gets to like the core reasons as to why people are feeling these things, and that's usually a big driver. Just thinking while you were talking, almost the flip side to that, if you are the person putting your hand up and driving change and not seeing it within your organization, that for some people they then may perceive that you advocating for change is criticizing them for not being good enough, having done it wrong in the past. And those go into those things of status, prestige, belonging,
Yes.
agency and things. So it is very much that dynamic on both sides.
Yeah, I think the more I start understanding these deeper components, the more I have compassion and an approach to my work and how to lead change. So
Definitely. Something I'd just like to touch on is you mentioned part of your journey in there as well. And we'll wind the clock back a bit and speak about that and your ability to lead change. So when you were running this at the California Symphony Orchestra, what were the reasons for you driving change, and how do you sort of go about that on your own personal journey?
A few reasons. One matches what I've already said. I saw it in the numbers. I knew I was inheriting a budget crisis. When I arrived, I knew it was bad. I didn't know how bad. So once I got there, I mean, we could not make payroll at the end of the month. It was that bad. So I knew like something's got to change. And I was so lucky. And one of the reasons I took the job is because I was lucky in that I had a board chair who also believed this. He was from day one of the interview and recruitment process saying, we know we can't do things the way we used to because we see what that graph looks like. We see those negative trend lines, pick up thing, audience declining, financial decline, whatever. And he was like, we know that that graph is going to continue a downward trend unless we do something about it. And so that's one of the reasons I took the job, because I had this invitation and freedom to make the change. And so again, it just goes back to being practical. If we got to do something differently, if you want different results, you have to do something differently, right? And so, okay, that's thing one. Thing two is a lot of people, I think there's maybe a misnomer. I'm well known for my work at the California Symphony, or at least known to some degree by some people. And yet those strategies we put in place were things I had been working on in prior jobs and prior roles and prior organizations. And so I say this because I came in with not just ideas, but evidence of what had been working as much as my prior role scope would allow for. So things that I champion, like audience retention, like sometimes it's very, tactical, like we've got to get our websites more functional. How do we reduce friction in an e-commerce purchase? Some of those things were things I'd worked on before in my various marketing roles. And so you start putting that together, and then I got to come in from the top, and I had, like I said, I had evidence. We had my job prior to the California Symphony, we grew revenue, I think, by like 44%. And I remember at the time thinking, I'm never going to see that kind of growth again. In California Symphony, we doubled. So I was like, okay, now I really think maybe I'll never see that kind of growth again. But the point is, I had those kind of things, as indicators that, yeah, this approach is going to work. And then prior to that, at the Seattle Opera, I was, in my 20s in that job. So it was a lot of like, starting there, I founded the digital channels. This is really dating myself, but I got to see the early days of data behind all of that and how you can track, like click through to your website to purchase. And I got super nerdy about that and how we can see that journey and connect it directly to our bottom line. Anyways, you put it all together. Then I go to this organization from the top, get to piece it all together holistically. And then you start adding in things like company culture that is more difficult to measure. And I think it's all of that combined is why I wanted to see change, and a bit getting into the answer of how as well.
Definitely. I think what's really fascinating from your journey is not, again, just putting into evidence and the evidence you have and putting into practice some of the things you've done before. But for me, it was the speed of change, in particular at the California Symphony Orchestra. And we're not really an industry that's renowned for being particularly nimble. So how do we adopt change at a faster rate like you've previously done, and also helped other people to do as well?
I don't know if I should say thank you or I'm sorry for going so fast with change. So I think, like, on one hand, let me zoom out. The research tells us change is not done in big fell swoops. Change is done in small steps at a time, and small steps are what add up to big change. So I was aware of that going in. I'm a big fan of experimentation. I'm a big fan of test, measure, iterate, all of that. And yet, you already heard me say I inherited a crisis. We didn't have time. We had to make some changes and make some changes fast. So I started with what I knew, kind of picking up right where I left off. There were some things where I knew, I was like, we can make these improvements to our website. We can make these improvements to our advertising. Let's cut the print and put it in digital. Let's start looking at the kind of content on our social channels and, how do we improve that? There were some fundraising victories. I haven't talked about fundraising yet that I knew I was able to get out of the gate. And so some of those, you call it change, but some of that was I just knew from my prior experience, we have to do this and this is going to work. So some of it is just a level of necessity combined with confidence from the experience I brought into the role. Then I would say all of that got us through year one. Year one, we ended up balancing the budget for the first time that orchestra had seen in like a decade. And I thought, okay, We are not in the clear, but wow, we are out of hot water. So, okay. Then end of year 1 is when I started thinking, now what? I've kind of pulled every trick out of the bag I had at that point. And so then I started really, I don't want to say caught our breath, because I do think we had our foot on the gas a lot, but at least it was like got to the end of that first season. And then we started asking collectively why some of the things we were seeing in our numbers were true. So anybody who's heard me speak before has probably heard me say, the audience retention stats, and up to 90% of newcomers don't come back. We were seeing that in our data. We were seeing, we had not rebounded our subscriber numbers yet. And so we were trying to understand like why we had seen a little bit of growth in year 1, but not a lot. And I thought, okay, there was no dedicated strategy yet on subscriptions, on subscription sales. And so I would say year 2 is when we started actually looking at, okay, now how do we solve more problems? How do we start addressing more issues? And that's when we did the Orchestra X project, which, for everybody listening, the short version is it's user experience research. We went to our new audiences and asked them about their experience. How do you feel when you go to the orchestra? And that's when we learned so many things that forevermore changed to this day, how I think about audience development and cultivating audiences. And that started getting into some of the learnings and findings of the art is not the problem. They loved the performance. It blew them away. It was everything else tangential to the experience that was a point of friction or a point of pain emotionally. And then once we started addressing that and attacking, how do we make somebody feel welcome? How do we make somebody not have anxiety over what to wear? How do we make somebody not feel ashamed because they got shushed because they applauded at the quote unquote wrong time? It was like, okay, these are some real hard emotions people feel. And once we started trying to solve for that, that's another series of changes. And at that point, it was new things I had not yet done in my career. And sure enough, that like brought us the next wave of results. And then the last thing I'll add is layered on top of that is we got so serious about audience retention. It wasn't just how do we get new people, but how do we get them coming back? How do we develop loyalty? How do we then build those subscriber numbers and ultimately those donor numbers? So anyways, year 2, year 3, that's where we really got cooking. And I feel like it was, the change was was more focused, not just Aubrey came in and was like, guys, we gotta rock and roll now,
Definitely, there is so much to unpack there,
I know, I'm
which is
sorry.
really exciting. It's great, but the best part is you've already set up a question further down the line. So I'm now going to have to pivot, which is exciting. But you were talking about that 90% of first-time audiences don't come back, and you really focused on audience retention. So the question I'd written down was that we focus a lot on getting first-time audiences as an industry. What do you think to that approach? And I'm guessing that actually you may want to focus more on retention rather than getting first-time people.
Yeah, I think that I was going to say wrongly focused. That sounds like such strong language, but I think in a world where we can't do everything, like that's our like shared understanding. We know we can't do everything. We have limited staff, limited time. There's a million things on our to-do list. I don't think acquisition should be our top priority, because the data show what we've just said is that we actually are collectively very good at getting new audiences. This is true in Europe. This is true in the US. This is true for organizations I've worked with in Australia. So it's like pick your place in the world, basically. And we're pretty good at getting people to come once. And we collectively really struggle with getting them to come back. And the reason I care so much about getting a first-timer to come back is because any kind of future revenue can't happen unless they come a second time. Nobody's going to become a subscriber if they come once and then never return. Like, obviously, they're not subscribing. They're falling off. Nobody's going to become a donor if we can't get them to come back a second time. So that's why, for me, that first-timer visit is so critical. That is the inflection point of whether, we're going to be irrelevant to them and they're done and it was a bucket list item, even if they had a decent time, bucket list item, or it's the beginning of a relationship, which in my mind equates to revenue, which we need. So where am I going with this? All of this is to say, I think that retention then should be our focus. If we're pretty good at getting new people, anybody, if you're not sure, run your own numbers, look at your CRM, see how many new accounts do you have in a year? How many new ticket purchases do you have per performance? The answer is probably greater than zero. And so I am of the mindset, like, let's focus on keeping the people we already have, people who have already raised their hand, so to speak, and said, I want to see what you're doing. I'm interested in what you're doing. How do we invite them back and secure that future revenue for ourselves? The last thing I'll say is I use the analogy. There's two new analogies I use. I'll share with you that I didn't used to use, years ago when I started, over 10 years ago when I started talking about all this. So now the new analogies are one analogy for the problem, one analogy for the solution. The problem is it's a leaky bucket, right? If we have a leaky bucket, these people are kind of leaking out of our CRMs, leaking out of our organizations, reach, grasp, whatever. You keep putting water in a leaky bucket, new audiences, filling it up, it just leaks right back out, right? And so leaky bucket, that's kind of the new analogy for the problem. The new analogy I have for the solution is that once we start working on retention, it's like compound interest. It's not just, oh, how many first-timers did we get to come back within 12 months? Yes, that matters. There's some money on the table. But the real money comes, what about those people who we got to be multi-buyers last year? They came back, and then in year 2 or 3, we were able to convert them to subscribers. And then in year 4, when we were able to convert them to renewing subscribers, then we start soliciting them for a donation. And so it's like, okay, that money, people who now been working on retention, the organizations that I work with, when they're year 1, they do okay. Year 2, they're like, oh, this is no joke. By year 3, they're like, holy fill in the blank. Like this, it just keeps getting better and better. And the retention, it's like a flywheel effect. It kind of gets easier because people are becoming more loyal, which makes it easier to then upsell them at the appropriate time. So, okay, there you go. That's a lot on retention and all my new analogies.
They are great analogies. I love the compound interest one in particular. And I was thinking, as you were saying, as well, the idea of, as well as them becoming more in-depth connections with the orchestra, they're also then going to potentially bring new audience members with them as well. So that idea of compound interest is within the organization and also then bringing people with, which I absolutely love. Definitely borrowing the leaky bucket. So with that, obviously you've been making the case for change. What are some of the potential negative reactions when you've done change with these organizations, whether it is making it more accessible for first-time audiences or retention or making people feel more welcome in ways that may feel like it's taking away from some of the previous way of doing things for audiences and organizations?
There's a few things I've learned about change over the years and how to properly lead change or most effectively lead change. And this is based on, I just try to consume every bit of research I can out there on how to best affect change. And then some of it's just from my own experience. So I mentioned this before, but effective change is small, not big, micro steps. And so sometimes people hear me talk or they read my book and they're like, wow, that's a lot. It feels very overwhelming. And the answer is yes. Yes, change can be overwhelming. I mean, there's a whole body of psychological research on, like, we talked about the internal things happening earlier. Like, it's a lot. It's an overwhelm to the system operationally and within ourselves. And so micro steps, small steps are a way to combat that. That makes it more doable. That makes it more tolerable. So small changes, everybody I work with, I try to recommend, of all the things they hear me talk about or ask me about, pick one thing, two things, like just try to figure out like what sparks your interest, what feels interesting to you as an organization. Try those things and try it as a test. And then this gets into another step or tip to lead change, which is call it a test, call it an experiment. I'm a huge fan of labeling that this is not the new way forward forever and ever, amen. This is something we're going to try in response to what we're learning and seeing, what we know about our own audiences, our own numbers, our own revenue. We're going to try this thing, whatever it is. We're going to try to update a couple pages on our website with different language to see how that affects conversion rates. How many people then click through to the sales path? That's measurable. We're going to try not to solicit our first-time buyers for a donation for the next, pick a time, 6 months, I don't know, and see if we only focus on inviting those people back, Can we get more of those people to return? Can we actually make more money in their ticket purchases than their $20 donation for those of them that convert? And so it's like, okay, but we're just going to call it a test, because the thing with the test is maybe it doesn't work. Maybe you don't want to etch it in stone. And then you get to say to yourself, to your staff, to your teams, to your board, we tried. We tried, and this is what we learned. And this is the third thing about change, is that you learn by doing. And I think so often, this is not just in our field, I think in some ways it's human nature. We get so in our heads. What if this goes wrong? What if this doesn't work? What if this, or how? How do I do this? How do I do that? I get that a lot. Again, goes back to the desire of change. Aubrey, but how? You learn by doing. And so in some ways you have to, I was going to say rip the Band-Aid off, but rip the Band-Aid off for the micro step or the test, and you just learn so much more by actually trying something than talking about it in yet another meeting or whatever. So there you go. There's three main ways. A fourth one just popped in my head. Sorry, now I got to say this. When something goes well, if you are a change advocate, you have to be the loudest cheerleader. This is what research shows. This is definitely true in my own experience. Everybody has to know. So let's say you run a test and there's some success to report back. You got to make sure everybody knows. You have to sound like a broken record. You got to get out your pom-poms, basically. Guys, like, we tried this thing and here are the numbers and the data is showing like we did it, and it is our victory collectively. And so the research behind that is, you really have to, because it's a lot of emotional labor for anybody to undergo any kind of change, you have to help with that emotional labor and really cheer people on. So anyways, there you go. There's 4 kind of tips to start enacting change.
Fantastic advice. And there's one bit I want to sort of pull out from there, which is the idea of trying things, doing them to experiment and learning from them. We see that so much in the business world, in particular in tech, that they are constantly trying, failing, and learning as part of this. In your book, Run It Like a Business, and also in your podcast, you are taking inspiration from the commercial world, the business world, and looking for some different ways of doing things there. What can we learn from this more sort of commercially minded approach?
Something that immediately comes to mind is our subscription models. I think because it's such a hot topic, we often say, or we see a decline in subscriptions on the whole, and kind of also on the whole as a field, we tend to say the subscription model is broken, or the subscription model is dead, or the subscription model isn't what it used to be when it really worked for us in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And yet, everywhere else in our lives, the subscription model is prolific. It is everywhere we go. It's our Amazon, our Netflix, our fill in the blank. I got my dog's food delivered on subscription these days, right? So it's like anything almost in our lives is driven by subscription model, the media we consume. And this question really plagued me as I was writing my book of why is there this dichotomy of, in the arts it's such a struggle, everywhere else it seems to be going gangbusters, and it's not just gangbusters, it's like the best accepted practice for so many businesses. And so I really dug into what are they doing differently? What is the quote unquote business world doing differently than us? And there are a few things. I think I outline, I want to say it's like 11 differences or something like that in my book. But one that I think, it sounds so simple, but speaking of change, it's a tough one for some organizations, is auto renewal versus opt out renewal, or auto renewal is opt out renewal. The customer has to opt out versus opt in. And so to define that a little better, in the arts, we do this with subscriptions and we do this with donations usually too. Somebody makes a gift or somebody buys a package, and then, coming up on a year later, we say, would you like to renew? Would you like to give again? Would you like to subscribe again? And that is the opposite way. I think this is the number one foundational way. We are opposite of all these other successful, thriving subscription brands everywhere else. And to put a finer point on it, Netflix is not asking us every month, would you like to renew? Netflix is happily renewing us. Amazon's happily renewing my Prime membership. They'll give me a heads up, I'm going to charge your card, but they're not opting out for me. And that's what we do. We opt out everybody for them, wipe the slate clean, set our ledgers to 0 at the new fiscal year, and then have to get all of those people back again. And that is a huge, huge, huge hurdle. and a huge body of work for our teams. Now, every time I say this, I know there are people, saying, sounds great, but feels impossible. How will we ever be able to change the way we do our operations and handle our subscriptions? And how could we just auto renew people? And, there's so many reasons why I understand this is operationally a big change for us. So going back to some micro steps, organizations that I've worked with, different organizations have done this different ways. But to give a few examples, one of my favorites, this was early on, this is a few years ago now, the Fort Collins Symphony said, we're not ready for full-on auto renewals, but what we are going to do, this is such a great example of what's the babyest test we can do. And they said, we're going to send everybody's renewal form, get it down to one sheet of paper. So they merged in all kinds of stuff they used to ask for. They're like, yeah, we know their address. We know their phone number. We know their seat location. We know how much they paid. We're going to tell them, check this box at the top of the form if you want everything to stay the same. Or if you want changes, you can request your seat change or whatever, or call us, or the typical things we tend to do with our subscriptions. They had so many subscribers write to them and call them saying, oh my gosh, thank you. You made it so easy for me. They were worried people were going to be mad. And instead they got people saying, oh my gosh, what took you so long? So, and their renewal rate went up because they made it easy. And it was just that, check the box. So that's one example. There was another organization I worked with. They, this is Chamber Music Society of Salt Lake. They're in my Run It Like a Business Academy. They also were nervous. They'd heard me talk about this. They're in my academy. So taking, training on how to implement these strategies. And their chief executive, he said, we were nervous. We felt like this is the change we need to make. We could see the revenue potential. And we thought, okay, talk about ripping the Band-Aid off. They thought we're just going to do it. And they communicated it with everybody. We're moving to this model. You can absolutely opt out. We will always tell you before we charge your credit card. They tried to do everything to be completely transparent, which is part of the recommended best practice with an auto renewal model. And kind of the same thing. They had people who were like, oh my gosh, you made this so much easier for me. Then it was subscription renewal time. And it was like, boom, money in the bank, done. People happy, done. And then they could turn their focus to all the other millions of things they had to do, marketing related and otherwise, right? Small organization. He was like, I got to spend more time meeting with donors. Right. You should spend your time going after where there's more money on the table with your major donors, for example. So anyways, I could go on and on, but just this idea of what's a small step? How can you test it? Yes, it can be done. Yes, organizations are doing it. It feels like a lot sometimes, but it's just one example of, wow, that one change can make a really big difference.
I think it's such a good example because the whole thing from there is impact. And the actual idea of like the changes you outline are so almost simple and easy and actionable to actually then go out and do, which is, I think, a really inspirational story that can also be applied across so many other things as well.
Yeah.
So one thing I really like to pick your brains out before we start to wrap up is that you've been someone who's been great at commentating on the industry, of seeing trends and sort of seeing where the industry is going to go. What is the main challenge you see facing the industry in the next 5 years?
Oh, that's a good one. I think, we haven't talked about AI yet, so I think it's probably necessary for us to mention AI as part of talking about responding to changes in the world around us. I think for arts and culture, at least where we are right now and where we are in the development of AI as a technology and tool is, I don't think it's going to replace jobs for us, at least not yet. Certainly not artistically. And I don't think we're at that point on staff yet either. So this is good news for us. But what I think is that we're at this real crossroads. Like so many technologies before, we have to decide as organizations, are we going to embrace it? Are we going to learn about it? Are we going to try to figure out how to make this tool work for us? Or are we going to stick our head in the sand? And I really believe sticking our head in the sand comes with consequences later. If history repeats itself, it's like when Google first came out and digital advertising first came out and social media first came out. And I remember being, the 20-something-year-old kid in the office trying to make a case for these kinds of technologies and tools. And it was so difficult. And there's a whole other story on part of why I became so data-driven of, oh no, there's evidence to back this up. But the point is I see that recurring again now, like, oh, I don't know about this thing. It is a big body of work to kind of learn about it. It's also in the category of you have to learn by doing. You can't just talk about AI. You have to try to use it to truly learn about it and how it can best serve you and work for you. And so I think about things of efficiency. I keep saying, we have so many things to do, not enough hours in the day, not enough staff on the team. Well, AI can help us with that. And especially things that are automatable. Is that a word? Automatable?
Go with it.
um, recurring tasks, things like even in my own business, my general hello at inbox, like an agent helps manage all of that for me now. And that is something I used to pay an assistant to spend a lot of time on. Now I get to pay for that person to do higher level work. And that's, I think, the real prize for our organizations is if we can free up our teams to do higher level work, more of the strategic thinking we're talking about, more of this, it's definitely higher level work to ask for emotional labor to change some things. So if we can free up our staff just like the slightest bit to have a little bit of bandwidth for these other things we're talking about, that is going to pay so much in dividends for our organizations. So that's what I think about when I think about the use of AI and how do we apply it to what we're doing right now. And I think, the next 4 or 5 years, like that's going to sink or swim a lot of organizations. I think that one choice of how do we engage with this technology.
Really good points. And I love that you brought the historical precedent of other innovations as well that have sort of potentially we've been slow to adopt to really make the case for that.
Yeah.
So I now have just a quick couple of questions to wrap up on. If you could change one thing in the industry, what would it be and why?
It's like the whole time in the recording I've gone silent, David. One thing. Oh, some people ask me this and I never know what to say. One thing. I would say maybe it is just the appetite to try, the appetite to like, okay, we will test something. I think that might be in some ways the chasm or gap that I see. Like again, it's not the desire necessarily, like we were saying at the top. It's just taking that step to, okay, we're going to try something. Maybe that would be the one thing without like changing systemic issues or something like that. So, yeah.
Really good one. I like that a lot. It's like the common theme in this chat.
Yeah.
And then finally, what gives you hope for the future of classical music?
What gives me hope is when I see organizations doing, this is right on the heels of the last answer, some of these things we've talked about today, and they have not just success, but crazy success. There are so many organizations I've been lucky enough to work with over the last 6 years now. I've been doing this full time, and I think that's the beauty of it. There's so many ways we could change, so many things we could do, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so the organizations that do take these baby steps, try something new, try the one sheet renewal form for the subscriptions, or try writing the words on their website in a different way that's more approachable for anybody visiting, they start seeing great results. And it's that really fuels me because it all goes back to the top where I was like, we need revenue to fund our art. That is why I do this. This is why I get out of bed every morning, because I want to fund the art we produce. And so it's seeing these results, seeing that it can be done, and seeing it now repeatedly with many organizations. I've over 300 clients at this point, and I'm like, that's not a one-off. That's a pattern. And so that for me, I get so filled up and so hopeful for our industry.
I'd like to thank Aubrey Bergauer for joining me, and thank you for listening. Before I go, just a reminder that we're heading to Budapest for Classical Next 2026 from the 8th to the 11th of April. It's that 1 week where the whole industry actually gets together in one place, and I would love for you to join us. Registration is open now, and you can find out more over at classicalnext.com. If you have any thoughts on today's episode, or if there's someone you think that we should be talking to, you can find Classical Next on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, or just get in touch through the website. And if you found the show useful, please do subscribe and share it with your colleagues. I'm David Taylor, and I'll see you next time. Boom. We're done.